AI needs to feed and copyright is in the way. That's the message we're getting from big tech these days.
What's different here is that we're used to seeing the big money on the side of the copyright restrictions. And now we have Meta pirating books en masse. We have big tech CEOs testifying before lawmakers saying that copyright is going to stifle the innovation that we need to move forward. They've even dragged national security into the argument, saying that countries who enforce copyright will inevitably fall behind countries that set the training data free. Rights holders find themselves in a situation where not just their creations, but the very spirit and themes of those creations can be effortlessly co-opted by artificial intelligence.
And as an individual, what rights do you have? What rights should you have? Here, I have a copy of Quake 2 for Linux. I should be able to use the copyrighted material present here to play the data in my hand on a modern Linux system. But Nintendo just launched the Switch 2, and they seem to want to charge you $20 to play a game that you already own, but on the Switch 2. Whereas I can play this on any computer of the last 20 years, albeit with a little bit of work.
Each argument has some merit, but to really understand the situation, we need to understand the sordid history, the convergence of technology and copyright. Are we better off with or without it? Who really benefits from the modern copyright system? And how has corporate power and influence affected it in the past? Let's journey back to a time before copyright, before there were any protections, because modern copyright, it kind of protects the corporations, but remember that somebody created this and they had no protection because in those days, we had the Stationers Guild, and the Stationers Guild controlled everything. And they had the Crown and the Church of England behind them, giving them all of their authority.
What are we talking, like the 1970s here?
We're talking about 1400s. In fact, before there was even a printing press, when people were just scribbling them out by hand, there was already a control mechanism.
Wow.
And it was bad, because the stationers could do whatever they wanted. And in fact, later on, it took some time, but later on, they got granted the power to kick your door in.
Wow,
to make sure
that sounds like the RIAA.
That's actually much worse than the RIAA. The RIAA has to pretend. The stationers did not. In fact, they could burn the place down if they felt like it. So, before copyright, things were pretty dark.
So, well, that seems like a little bit far back. Why don't we start with the printing press?
Well, the printing press was important because, like I said earlier, the Crown and the Church, right? They granted these powers. They didn't just automatically get these powers. And the Crown and the Church recognized pretty quickly how disruptive the printing press could be.
You have to control the message. You can't just let anybody print anything.
They were not fans. And the printing press also made people more literate, which additionally stripped more power from the Crown and the Church.
So the printing press starts to become a form of entertainment?
A form of entertainment, yes. And even, just making people better at everything. Literacy, it turned out, was really good.
So by 1710, it was at a fever pitch, and we got the statue of Queen Anne?
Oh, you know a little bit about it. That's right. Queen Anne flipped the script on the stationers, and she recognized in the Statute of Anne that the authors should control these things.
Oh, the people that made the work. Yeah, that makes sense.
So then, after the Statute of Anne, it was recognized that the author had these rights, at least for some time.
So that was 14 years and then a 14-year extension, or 14 years after the author lived, something like that?
The statute established 14 years of ownership for the author, renewable after each 14-year period if the author was still alive. And if that work already existed when the statute came into law, you would get 21 years before public domain.
The Statute of Anne did not end the Stationers Guild or even break its monopoly. Centuries of entrenched power and existing deals with authors allowed them to keep some amount of control, but it really wasn't enough.
By 1774, they attempted to use the courts to push the idea of perpetual copyright in Donaldson versus Beckett. Not only was this rejected, but it expanded the idea of common law ownership of the author and the societal benefits of literacy.
2 years after Donaldson versus Beckett, a world-changing event would change copyright forever. What did I mess up?
We're number one. I was just saying USA number one.
Oh, I thought you were saying I messed up.
No.
There's one for the outtakes. 2 years after Donaldson versus Beckett, a world-changing event for copyright would happen, and copyrights changed forever. The English law had dominated, but in 1776, a revolution and a new constitution would enshrine copyright into the very bedrock of a nation.
To promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive rights to their respective writings and discoveries. That's the U.S. Constitution.
American copyright copied the 14-year ownership of the author from the European model, but limited it to only a single renewal for a total of 28 years.
However, American copyright was solely American. It didn't really consider international copyright at all. The new nation didn't have homegrown media to satisfy the ever-expanding literacy of the people, and so they just ignored it. They ignored the rights of all foreign authors and publishers, something that these international authors and publishers weren't super happy with. Famously, Charles Dickens very outspoken about this.
Sorry, Charles. The 14-year model remained largely unchanged for a long time. Literacy continued to climb among the world population, not just the United States, and written work flourished. Printing models and printing methods improved long before what had once been a nearly priceless handcrafted artifact of book creation. Now they're cheaply printed and sold for pennies. This led to a pivotal idea when it came to copyright and sales: the first sale doctrine.
Book publishers were unhappy about the robust secondary market for books. They wanted to stop what they saw as lost sales. Their solution was to print a requirement inside the cover of the book that all published books must sell at a minimum price of $1. And that demand was almost immediately challenged by the Macy's department store that we know today.
In Bobbs Merrill Company versus Strauss, this is 1908 we're talking, the U.S. Supreme Court finally ruled that once a book was sold, the publisher's control over that specific copy of the book ended. This was later codified in the Copyright Act of 1909.
But before we get to 1909, another major milestone in copyright happened in 1905. With our modern conveniences, it's easy to forget that in order to enjoy music and have a party in that era, someone had to actually play the music, and it was usually on a piano. This meant that sheet music was in high demand. Everybody wanted it. And as a printed work, it was under copyright.
With the advent of the self-playing piano, the second major instance of technology undermining copyright came along. The piano roll, a sort of punch card that held the instructions for how the piano machine would actually play a specific song, was targeted by the sheet music publishers. They argued that this violated their copyright on the actual sheet music.
This led to another Supreme Court battle, and one which the publishers lost. This also introduced an era where copyright would begin to spread beyond just written works to new forms of media.
The programmable piano. This takes us back to 1909 and the first sale doctrine. The Copyright Act of 1909 extended copyright beyond just printed works, codified the first sale doctrine, and extended copyright from 28 total years to 56, 28 times 2, total years.
Now, what the 1909 Act did not do was recognize any kind of corporate ownership of copyright. But as corporations began to gain power and new forms of media were creating huge business opportunities, the industries, they kind of just took it upon themselves.
Work for hire, the idea that works could be created by employees, but owned by a corporation, that was not law, but they started doing it anyway. The copyright for Steamboat Willie, who would go on to become the famous or infamous Mickey Mouse, that was assigned to Disney, and not the individual artists that were responsible for creating that.
Corporate ownership became the norm, and as the entertainment technology began to move rapidly, with inventions like the phonograph and the motion picture changing the entertainment landscape, it wasn't that long before those industries decided copyright needed to change yet again.
All this new money and power had a seat directly at the table when these new laws were being developed. The 60s and 70s saw major lobbying and corporate participation in what would become the new rules of copyright.
That was the Copyright Act of 1976, and it resulted, as usual, in consolidating power for corporate entities and extending all aspects of copyright. Copyright was now automatic, and did not require registration, though registration would be required in order to take any kind of enforcement action. And as with every iteration of copyright law, it extended the time yet again. Life of the author plus 50 years. But now corporate ownership got special treatment at 75 years.
That's highly distasteful. The introduction of a federal copyright system to replace state-based systems, a high infringement penalty for enforcement of copyright violations at $10,000 per work violated, and some other changes to the law. The law explicitly identified and favored work for hire as part of corporate ownership. With the added 25 years for corporate copyright, Steamboat Willie is in no danger of becoming public domain in 1984.
It didn't take long for a new form of technology to come about and, once again, upset the copyright apple cart, the video cassette recorder. VCR was an obvious threat to television and movie industries. As was the standard practice of the copyright cartel at that point, this quickly went to court in Sony versus Universal. This case introduced the ideas of time and format shifting, as the Supreme Court ruled that since television was offered for free, someone using a VCR, or Betamax as it was in that case, was simply changing the time at which they consumed free media. Since TV was free in broadcast, this established sustainable, non-infringing uses of the VCR, and it set a major copyright precedent. This was a hotly debated 5-4 decision, but we won.
Now, VHS and Betamax were analog technologies. They lost quality and didn't offer perfect copies, and over-the-air wasn't great either. It didn't take long for technology to advance to a point that changed this with digital recording, however. Digital audio tapes, DAT, hit the market and offered perfect reproductions of audio recordings. Now, you may have already guessed that this resulted in more legal maneuvering.
The Audio Home Recording Act of 1992 embraced and enhanced anti-copy technology that already existed in analog media, but it added the idea of anti-circumvention penalties for bypassing these safeties. It also introduced royalty charges built into the price of blank media and the equipment, royalties that will be paid directly to the entertainment industry. As a penance for the presumed offenders of copyright it would enable. All consumers were now presumed pirates, was indicative of the level of corporate control that had been gained with all these copyright shenanigans and laws.
By the late 1990s, CDs, DVDs, and even MP3s had brought about a full digital revolution in media. As before, corporate power aimed to reshape the laws, and they got their way with the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Now, the DMCA kept or expanded most of the worst aspects of its predecessors, and it increased the penalty for violating copyright to $150,000 per work. It was the takedown system, though, that really changed things. And I'm sure we're all familiar with that. The world was coming online. The copyright holders wanted a way to prevent their works from being shared online, and they got it in the form of the DMCA takedown requests. Take down and ask questions later.
Copyright holders can issue a takedown request anywhere online that they affirm that violates their copyright. Worst of all, at least in practice, there are no safeguards or penalties for false accusation. In the DMCA system, the rights holder is trusted implicitly.
Disappointing. The laundry list of false accusations, automated systems that routinely overreach with impunity, and outright abuses to free speech are far too long to cover here, but it's safe to say that almost everyone watching this video has been impacted negatively in some way by the DMCA takedown system.
The only thing the DMCA did differently than all the laws that came before it was that it didn't extend copyright. But that was okay because it turned out to be a safety play. The time extension was instead pushed forward concurrently with DMCA in the Sonny Bono Copyright Act, which extended life plus 70 years, and corporations got 95 or 120 based on publication and creation.
A few more notable court cases would further lock down copyright as digital media and file sharing became ubiquitous. In 2001, in Napster versus A&M Records, that would strip away the safe harbor provision of the DMCA. While VCR makers had been protected from direct legal action due to the substantial non-infringing uses of the VCR, this was ruled to not apply to online file sharing resulting from companies like Napster.
And then MGM versus Grokster, which focused on video file sharing instead of audio, established that the technology could induce a user to be a pirate. We hold that one who distributes a device with the object of promoting its use to infringe copyright, as shown by clear expression or other affirmative steps taken to foster infringement, is liable for the resulting acts of infringement by third parties.
So it's clear to me that as a copyrighted content enjoyer, that I have been asleep at the helm where there has been a concerted effort by rights holders going on for centuries to erode what seems to me to be some pretty basic property rights on the things that I've bought. I have Quake, a Quake 2. I bring this creative work forward with me in time. I have a console video game, and video game like for the console. It runs, on whatever. Theoretically, I could ship of Theseus, the old console that it runs on, with modern technology, eventually getting to a computer. This is merely a platform shift in the way that a VCR allowed a time and a format shift. This should be okay. Instead, with the DMCA and more recent court cases, the copyright lobby wants to co-opt companies and technologies alike to act as their enforcement arm. I really don't like the trajectory that we're on with, where some program or something running in the background is analyzing the contents of my phone or my laptop or Google Drive, whether or not it, deciding whether or not it wants to allow me access to stuff. That sounds insane. It surely would never happen, but it's actually already happened with Google Drive specifically.
But it is apparent based on the timeline we've presented here that any protections we gain from the system as consumers are only viable until the technology comes along to give the excuse to dismiss them. How can we establish a system of rules that can survive the lobbying and manufactured crises that will inevitably come? And how can we also protect actual creators who are at risk of being replaced by synthetic derivation?
If you take what we have given you here as background, then the whole universe of horrors that may be visited upon end users if we continue on this trajectory, not only will you have no rights to stop any of this, you will have a very adversarial relationship with your own devices. Devices you own will work against you to prevent you from doing things the way that you want.
Part of the reason we wanted to share this background is so that you understand just how long we've had this sliding window erosion of what rights we have to do with what we've purchased.
No reasonable person should think it's okay for Nintendo to block you from platform shifting your own owned console games to modern technology, whether that's a new console or emulation or whatever. Prohibition on format shifting DVDs that you own to your media server, again, it's not reasonable. So what would a Bill of Rights look like for copyright enjoyers? Well, we want your input. We've started a thread on the forum, and here's what we got so far.
The right to back up, format shift, and time shift your media.
The right to repair and modify.
The right to share tools with lawful uses.
The right to reverse engineer.
Graduated copyright enforcement. So copyright enforcement is kind of just all the same rules right now, but we should consider the severity of the crimes, the cultural relevance, the availability of things like we were talking about. If something is impossible to use in its current state, should it be a copyright violation?
I want Windows 3.1. Who cares? Local AI and private computation.
And the right to disable or reject remote kill switches.
Remember the HP printers that have turned adversarial? Naughty.
Windows.
Yeah. Have you tried Xbox Game Pass? The right to use alternative parts and supplies.
The right to anonymity in personal use.
The right to documentation and transparency.
And the right to escape end-of-life traps. When a product reaches end of life, you shouldn't be trapped into just buying something new.
The right to migrate and archive.
And the right to silence advertising in the things that you already own. If you are playing your own media on your television should not have the ability to insert ads that didn't exist in the media in the first place.
And that's a thing that we have to worry about in 2025. How insane is this? The right to resale and transfer digital goods.
And the right to protest surveillance and tattling agents.
The right to capture lawfully accessed media. And so this is just a start at what your consumer bill of rights might be. You can join us in in the forum add to it. We're still workshopping it. We're going to do a follow-up video on that.
But just keep in mind that copyright doesn't sit still. It changes, and it usually changes when technology changes. And I don't know if you've looked around lately, but it's changing.
So join us in the forum and we'll try to figure it out, and we'll see you there.